it again?
Yes, it was.
Excellent, thank you. Next up on our general business is opportunity for public comment. We have one. Karen Fraley? Excellent.
Microphone on this time?
Is the light on?
Is the mic on, Jen? Okay. The superintendent broke it.
Oh, okay.
Good. Maybe there's not a light on.
Sorry, Jim.
My name is Karen Fraley. I live at 414 Everett Drive in Waukesha. And as most of you know, I also spoke at the meeting on Monday night, asking you to do 3 things to improve our school's indoor air quality. So first, increase the ventilation rate, the level of outdoor air intake, and install higher level filters. Second, invest in HEPA air purifiers, preferably for every single classroom, but at minimum for frequently shared spaces such as art rooms, music rooms, gyms, cafeterias, and bathrooms. And third, invest in 1 or 2 CO2 monitors for each school to monitor the air quality, both of the CO2 itself and using CO2 as a proxy for the amount of air that's being rebreathed. So I would just like to emphasize that right now we have a unique opportunity to make a lasting impact on the health, attendance, and academic performance of our children by investing our additional federal funding in indoor air quality. So I spoke last time about the impact that improved ventilation will have on attendance by reducing the transmission of all respiratory diseases, such as colds and flu, because they're all airborne. So it's my hope that we never see a repeat of the day that Bethesda had to send home 100 students in a single day due to illness. Improvements in ventilation and filtration will also significantly help our students with allergies and asthma and help them to spend more time on their studies and less time struggling to breathe. If any of you had a chance to look through one of the studies I sent you yesterday, you'll have seen that portable HEPA air purifiers can remove around 90% of the aerosols from a closed classroom within 30 minutes. This, coupled with improvements to the overall building ventilation systems, could have a huge impact at a relatively low cost. There's no evidence that any of the fancy bells and whistles like UV lights, ionization, etc. improve outcomes. All we need are simple, mechanical, true HEPA air filters. Last time I further mentioned the impact of carbon dioxide itself on human cognition and decision making, and I just wanted to bring up 2 more studies that focus on schools specifically to add weight to the importance of acting immediately to improve ventilation. So first, there's a 2015 study in a school district in the Southwest that found a strong and significant relationship between ventilation rates and students' math test scores, and similar, though more variable effects on their scores in reading and science. So for each liter per second per person increase in ventilation, math scores increased by 0.5%, with a total effect of close to 3.25%. And then a 2016 study on the impact of carbon dioxide levels in a primary school classroom specifically found that increased levels of CO2 led to a significant measurable decrease in students' ability to concentrate during class. And the amount of the effect was comparable to the effect of skipping breakfast. So I hope that you all see the importance of seizing this opportunity to improve both the health and quality of education for our students. We all want our children to reach their maximum potential, and I hope that you will take immediate action toward that goal.
Thank you. All right, seeing no one else that wishes to address the committee, we're moving on to our action items. First action item is approval of minutes from the June 7th, 2021 meeting. Are you looking for a motion?
So moved.
Beats, is there a second? I want a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. 4-0. Our second action item is the approval of the vouchers. Did we get any questions?
There were no questions
No
this month.
questions. So since Monday or for the whole month?
Since Monday or the whole month.
Okay, excellent. Fantastic. Looking for a motion to approve the vouchers as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Dietz. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion, any questions for Sherry? Nothing? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Our next action item is the approval of the 2021 budget amendment.
You have to share that.
And this will be our new list. Nope.
Sorry. All right, so everyone should have a new copy of the budget amendments. They were slightly revised since Monday night. We had very little time to put them together for Monday, so given a little extra time, I decided that it was, there was some refinement that could be done. And so what we're trying to look at today is just where are some areas that we know we were over in one category and then under in another, that will help offset the overages. And so I kept it at a pretty high level. I can go through at more detail. We have the revenue. At a higher level, we have most of the expenditures. But starting out with the general fund, in anticipated revenue, most of it is additional revenue, except for our interest. We have fallen by about $50,000 on the interest. Open enrollment tuition was substantially higher, mainly because of the enrollment in eAchieve for families that chose that as their virtual option. It was very difficult to predict at the beginning of the year how that was going to flush out. We don't expect that to be the trend for next year, so we wouldn't anticipate this jump in revenue again next year, or I guess it's this year already officially.
So just so people understand, we're paid for the number of days they're actually open and enrolled with us. So our fear was mid-year, everyone would return to their home school or back to their home school district or whatever. So we were cautious with it. But as Sherry said, this number more than likely won't be matched again for the current fiscal year, I guess.
Correct. Bilingual bicultural aid was up slightly by an additional $64,000. That is based on prior year expenditures and the amount of the pot available to provide. Medicaid annual reimbursement. This is one that's always a frustrating category because they're about a year behind in getting us our annual reconciliation, and you never get to look at the numbers until they are pretty much sending you the check. So we had a nice bonus this year in that it came out $580,774 more than what was budgeted. And then a refund of prior year expenditures, an additional $276,332. A lot of that was E-rate reimbursements, which is another one. Again, we never know quite in what fiscal year the rebates are going to come. So that is giving us an anticipated revenue. Again, we're still booking things, so these may change slightly. The revenues are pretty solidified, but that gives us an additional $2,798,893 in revenue for this year that was not anticipated. So that's a good way to fall on the revenue side, to have additional revenue. And then looking at the any questions on revenues? This is general fund before I move on to expenditures.
Yeah, Mr. Como.
Yeah, just, it's related to revenues.
Okay.
It's in regards to eAchieve enrollment. Where are we at right now? Are we kind of going back to where we were pre-pandemic, or are we above, or?
Drawing back a little bit, I'm not.
A little bit above what we would have had pre-pandemic, but nowhere near where we were this past year.
Okay.
Between the elementary and secondary.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Moving on to the expenditures. So the expenditures we do expect to come in under this year, but right now, because we're still booking things, getting invoices, I don't have a number. So what I did with the budget amendment is look at what we know. What do we know where we're below, and what do we know that we're ahead, and wash those out to zero. So in August, when we come back with our finalized June numbers, we'll have a better feel for what is the exact surplus that we have available. But right now, it's just at a high-level categories. We're looking at undifferentiated curriculum, which is basically anything to do with your elementary or not specific to a curriculum item like math or science or something like that. We had additional expenditures of $402,000, and a lot of this, some of that went into cleaning supplies at the elementaries. Some of the salary things went one way or another, depending on, in the elementary, we had some additional 4K teachers that jumped that number up. Regular curriculum, we were down by $700,000, so we had a little bit of surplus there that helps to offset. Pupil services, we had a slight increase of $376,000, but instructional staff services came in quite a bit under of $1.4 million. Again, helps to offset the overages. Business administration, $910,000 over for additional project work and things that we were able to take on. Other support services, over by $1.2 million. Transfers to special education. Special education right now is looking like it's going to come in with about $800,000 more of revenue than was expected, and expenditures coming in right where we expect them to be. So we're able to drop that transfer by about $800,000. We've added a transfer to the Capital Fund 47, which is our, sorry, I didn't change it there, the Field of Many Dreams. We've got this little lingering amount sitting out there of a negative fund balance of $65,007, and that's due to the uncollectible advertising, in most cases sponsorship. And we'd like to just clear that off because we've exhausted pretty much all opportunity to collect that money at this point and feel it's not collectible and that we should just wash it off the books. And that would require a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 47 to cover that. And we're in a good position this year to be able to cover that cost.
And I have Amy Holly's here from our office, and she's taken on Field of Many Dreams for the last 4 or 5 years, in case you have questions about processes and what we've done to try to collect those funds. But it really comes down to, I think the first fundraising event for this was 2010. And we got off to a rough start with the advertising, and it took us probably a year to get it organized to figure out where we were. So we bring it back. It's not a mandatory thing. It's at the board's discretion. We're just to the point where we're not very hopeful of any additional funds being gained. But
Yeah, I thought in the beginning we didn't quite meet the expectations of some of the advertisers. Would that be correct?
yeah, if it goes back, originally the advertising was supposed to be painted onto the fields, and then the paint wouldn't adhere to the turf. And then I think we kind of took a year where no one knew what to do. And then in 15 or 16, it was suggested, and I thought it was a good idea, why are we painting on the turf? Let's kind of form tent advertising to go along, kind of like a soccer field would have. And by then we got everything kind of arranged in terms of who needs to be paid and billed and all that. But, time goes by during that period. So it was a rough rollout of collections.
Yeah, and I would characterize it that perhaps these firms that were committing to advertising, we didn't meet the original expectations, and I can see why funds would be withheld, whether it was a timing thing, whether it was the form of advertisement. But if we couldn't come through on our end of the bargain, I can see why it was difficult to collect. So I'm okay with it. I think this is the right thing to do. I don't necessarily believe we should be putting forth additional efforts to collect. And it's been 10 or 11 years. I think it's probably going to be almost impossible to collect after that amount of time. And I think they have a couple legs to stand on, actually.
And we did, just so the board knows, we did end up fulfilling the advertisement agreements, but much after the fanfare of the turf. I do think part of the excitement was certainly lost by the time we came up with the new signage. I would agree with you. I don't think we met up to what we had hoped it would be and what they hoped it would be as well. So,
And sometimes those things happen. Nobody could anticipate that the paint wouldn't adhere to the field. Who would anticipate
That
that?
when the lines are paint.
And
You
right,
know, there's
right.
already paint on the field.
So it's sometimes it's really no one's fault kind of thing, you know. Not that we're looking for fault, but things happen, and I think this is probably time to write it off. Is my thought.
For the rest of the adjustments, just so you get some backdrop, it looks as though we're adding so much revenue and just reshuffling the expenditures. But keep in mind, the board approved a deficit $2 million budget. We set aside dollars for COVID. We set aside dollars for Hawthorne's elevator, the initial phase of that. So really, when it's all said and done, we'll have close to a revenues equals expenditures budget. But this form, which I think is already confusing enough, if you just look at those totals, you're thinking, holy cow, we have this huge windfall, and just a pure revenues to expenditures measurement, it's going to kind of come out close to even. So,
And all these expenditures, they're just transfers. So we're going from one account to another. So it doesn't impact essentially the amount of our expenditures.
no, just
Not an
aligning it
increase.
to actuals.
Okay.
And one other thing, in the budget that was approved, we had approved $800,000 for COVID-related expenditures, not knowing what they were going to be. Doesn't look as though we're going to end up using that $800,000, but I just want to tie it into the service reduction list that you were shared in February, I believe. We recommend using $800,000 potentially for textbook adoptions. So just reshifting those dollars. So just want to, because it all kind of blends together eventually into one topic. So just wanted to point that out.
Okay, well, then I'll move on to the Special Education Fund. Really, our categorical aid came in higher, which allows us to drop the transfer from the general fund, but also our high-cost claim came in significantly higher this year. And so we have a little bit of a surplus left in there, but that we still have some expenditures coming through, so I anticipate that surplus will be used up by those. This is our anticipated transfer at this point in time. For our debt service fund, we defeased the amount, the $5.2 million, and then we didn't budget for it right away because at that point in time, we're not sure what year we wanted to make that early payment in, but with advisement from PMA Financial, it was the right thing to do to pay that this year. So the money that we defeased, we paid out right away, and so this budget line item it reflects the actual payment against our referendum debt, the additional payment that we made. The Fund 47, the capital projects for the Field of Many Dreams, that just shows on that side the amended amount of revenue that would be coming in to clean that up. And then in food service, our summer food service aid is higher than what was anticipated, mainly because of the amount of meals that we've served and the fact that they upped the price or the meal reimbursement rate for the summer food service. So we've got an additional $1.5 million in summer food revenue, but we've also had more capital expenditures that we were able to put in for the referendum projects to charge back to Fund 50, which was in the plan all along, but we were able to put some more into that. So that is on the expenditure side an increase in Fund 50. And we still have a significant food service fund balance right now that we're being strongly encouraged by DPI to get that down once and for all. So
Keep in mind, you have one layer of government that's saying don't have fund balance well, another layer of government saying you have to raise your fees.
Right.
So
Good pointing. Mr. Como.
So with the, didn't we use 1.3 million of the food service funds for some of the changes we made over the last couple of years?
yeah, and we're actually going to increase that to 1.5 because otherwise we get the letter from DPI saying our fund balance is too large.
Okay, so 200,000 more, we won't get the letter, is what you're saying.
It might be a slightly different letter, but we anticipate getting a letter.
Okay.
we'll most
Right.
likely still be over. What DPI wants to see, or the USDA wants to see, is that you have 3 months' worth of expenditures available, which in our case is about $1 million. And right now, our fund balance, we have some final bills to pay yet, but it's sitting at 2.6 million.
So do we have any idea? So this is a good problem to have. This isn't
It
a
is.
problem. This
Yes,
is
it
a
is.
good situation to have. It's not a
Certainly
problem.
beats us supplementing Fund $10 to
Right.
float Fund 50, absolutely.
So have we given any thought as to how we might use those monies?
I guess the next, now, a little history, we've done a complete remodel of North and South's kitchens. There is still West out there, which I don't think would be the full remodel that we did at the other two high schools, certainly. The middle schools, after this summer, will have all new cafeterias, except for Saratoga. And there's some needs at the elementary levels, but I think we will probably transition to maybe coding some additional costs there, whether it's utilities or custodial time, or there's some of those things are better than others in terms of tracking, but
Can these monies be used for ventilation in the cafeterias?
That would be
That would-
pushing it, because that's a shared space, so trying to determine the actual percentage that it's used for food service versus when it's used for other
Oh.
things could be difficult to get that approved.
That's why I'm asking.
just like they won't allow us to add square footage.
Correct.
You can't do new construction of
Oh, that's right.
expanding a
I remember
kitchen.
that.
So it's the federal government, so there's a lot of rules to go with it, but we'll come up with something.
Okay.
I've also talked about with Airmark about upgrading our offerings in terms of
Mm-hmm.
quality and those types of things. Well, and then COVID hit and all those conversations kind of evaporated, but we'll resume those.
So how did we get to 2.6 million? Is that strictly from sales of food for our,
It was reimbursement.
This year was all
federal
reimbursements.
is all
reimbursement.
reimbursements from this year or from,
No, we went into the year with, I want to say, 1.6 million, I believe it was. I'm sorry. Well, actually, do we have
7, I'm showing.
7
But we knew
million?
some of that was going to be used on the referendum projects, right?
right?
So part of the additional 2.6 is, I know we came to the board and asked for additional increase to pay Airmark more. There was a slight hiccup with that, in that there was something that needed to be filed with DPI that Airmark was not aware of, that needed to be filed the month that we started paying them that. That didn't get filed until April. So we were looking at November, December, January, February, March, that we did not pay them that additional amount because of the lack of filing with DPI. They come to terms with that and are fine.
That was their filing.
Yes.
So-
So that money that we had expected to expend by giving it back to Airmark ended up
Okay.
staying in our fund balance. And we worked with DPI, and there was no budging on that.
But there's other needs out there. There's cafeteria tables, and
Yeah, right.
You get into that, you can spend a lot of money very quickly. So we'll develop a plan to, just like we had with the construction for the referendum. It'll be the same type of planning process.
Mr. Como.
I move approval of the 2020-2021 budget amendments as presented.
Okay, is there a second? Excellent, thank you, Mrs. Ranichek. Any further questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, 4-0. Our final action item of the evening would be approval of the district COVID-19 letter. Take it away.
Yeah, I'll let Jim and Joe. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Mr. McCaffrey. We'll just open this up. So Dr. Cook deserves credit for writing this letter. We wrote a letter back in March that outlined for the coming school year, 21-22, that we would offer just 2 learning options, our traditional face-to-face model and then eAchieve for families that preferred virtual. And since May, when we had the May 12th board meeting and we removed essentially all of our mitigation strategies, we have not seen an increase in cases whatsoever. The cases in the county. The cases in Wisconsin continue to be as low as they have been. And so I'll let Dr. Cook kind of just walk through this letter that we're seeking your approval of so that we could ideally communicate with families and our staff with almost 2 months before the school year to avoid what we had last year when we were kind of still trying to figure out what we were going to do in August, so they can start planning and getting ready, and we'll welcome your feedback.
Yeah, so without reading the letter, we just wanted to, reiterate or remind families where we have been as it pertains to vaccines and the availability of vaccines for everybody 12 and older. Reiterating what was done on May 12th around it being a mask optional for families, that if they want to send their child to school with a mask, or if a staff member wants to wear a mask, certainly they're right to do that. Let families know that we're going to be returning to the regular special schedule at the elementary level, where the kids go to the art room, the music room, instead of having art on a cart and music on a cart and such. We wanted to let families know that we're going to continue to clean our schools. We want to make sure that our schools are that we are going to monitor the status of COVID. We, in January, I believe the board approved the transition criteria. We'll monitor where things are at within the district and in the county. And if we start to see a situation, we'll approach the board and ask to have a meeting and sit down and discuss where we're at. Do we need to build mitigation strategies in? So we're not just going to let it go, but we'll keep an eye on things. We reminded families that the summer is the optimal time to vaccinate if that's their choice, because of the 2-shot cycle, or, it's 3 weeks apart, I think, was the Pfizer shot. So better to get that in you and preventing COVID in you in the summer instead of waiting until the school year to start, where you could run into the potential side effects. We wanted to make sure that we provide the best possible opportunity to families. We knew that last year we did our best, but it was different than what it was in 2019. So we want to make sure that we're providing the best opportunities for kids going into this school year. So what we put into the letter, just to give people, again, a heads up, like Dr. Siebert said, as to what we plan on doing for next school year, and then letting people make their decisions, because we do have eAchieve that goes grades 4K through 12 next year, which is a nice opportunity for families if they want the virtual. Then we'll have our face-to-face environment at all of our other schools.
And then maybe just one other piece that Dr. Cook also had in the letter was he talked about how the summer is a good time for vaccination, but also that the district views that as a family choice. And so the district would not vaccinate or have vaccinations available, and the district also would not be testing.
Excellent. Any questions? Comments? Mr. Como?
Thank you. First of all, last year it was hard on parents in August. They didn't know what to do. And we were having to make some big decisions in a very short period of time with whatever information we had. So I'm glad that we are coming out with this now, if this passes. And I think, puts our parents in a much better position to, weigh the pros and cons with their option of, do they want to go to eAchieve or not? They can talk about optional masks. There's plenty of time for them to really work through, what choices are before them right now. Whereas last year, everything was just, it was hard. It was crunched together. If we could have last year made all the decisions that we made in August, in May, we would have. We didn't have the information in May to do that. So, I think we're in a much better position this year. We know a lot more about COVID, the virus, and I think the main components of this letter are well written and well thought out, and I feel very comfortable with this approach.
Comments? Ms. Manchak?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for recognizing that it is a family decision and not a district decision, and I think that's an important piece in there. And thank you for crafting that. I think it helps to just, like you said, just get out in front of it and just let people know what to expect and not have that anxiety before the beginning of the year.
Any other, Mr. Dietz?
If this was approved tonight, when would the timeline be for sending it out?
We'd work on this on Thursday and work with Mary Jo and with Natalia to get it translated, and we'd like to get it out later this week.
Awesome.
So the comments, fantastic letter. It's a great job for the whole team. And I appreciate all the work that you have put into working through this issue. So thank you very much. Harry?
Reminding people, I don't know, if you want to remind people when school starts, I don't know.
It's just a thought.
Because it's
Sometime
coming.
at the beginning of September.
It's coming.
Just,
It's starting.
Not looking
year
that
with-
far ahead yet, Mr. Dietz.
No, that's fine. I don't expect you to, but the school year, begins on whatever. I don't know. That's just,
Oh, we'll build that into the letter. Yes.
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. What did you think I meant? Oh, we'll talk
Always
later.
have
Asking
that.
me to say when school started tonight.
The first. It is the first, and that's when it'll be starting. Already, I'll be looking for a motion for approval of the COVID-19 letter, COVID-19 family letter.
So moved.
Mr. Dietz, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Como, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes 4-0. That wraps up our action items for the evening. Next up is discussion information items. First is the monthly budget report.
Okay. Well, because this report had to be done within 2 days of the month-end close, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We are going to have a lot more information in August with all the final bills coming in. So we'll come back in August with a better picture of really where we ended the fiscal year. A lot of what I have in this report mainly is talking about the areas that we're above and the areas we're below, which we've pretty much already hit with the amendment discussion. So the good news is we're going to end on a positive note, which is always a good thing to be able to report. But as far as going through the detail, I think in lieu of time, we'll pass on that unless there are specific questions on the report. But I would like to talk about the funded insurance fund balance. But were there any specific questions on the expenditures or revenues in the report?
I just have one question. Sure, the ESSER, in here it says that we have to apply for the final grant, or we have to make the claims.
Yes,
And then it says once they're finalized, they're booked. Are they booked before we receive the check, or is that what you mean by finalized?
the revenue will be booked. Right now, all the expenditures are already in this report.
Okay.
So all the money that we've spent $1.1 million
Right.
on ESSER is in the expenses already.
Okay.
But it's not reflected in the revenue yet.
Okay.
And so as soon I submitted our final budget actually today.
Okay.
As soon as DPI approves it, we're ready to send in the final, it's not quite the final claim, it's final on our end, but there's a little bit of private school money that's being carried over into next year for a couple of the schools. So there'll
Okay.
be just a small amount. But then once we file that final claim, we book it as a receivable so that it's reflected in the revenue side of things.
Okay.
But the expenditures are already in here.
Okay. And then the only other question I have is the Medicaid reconciliation payment. How many years is that for, though?
1 year.
That's 1 year. Wow. Yeah.
I'm not
Wow.
a bad budgeter.
That's a lot for a year.
But I'm a bad
that we
predictor,
covered and we
apparently.
didn't- That we didn't get. That's a lot to cover.
Oh, someone's not, Mike isn't on.
Right. And Sherry has been in contact with our auditor on how to handle all this ESSER,
Yep.
unemployment reimbursement, all
FEMA.
these things we might get. And so it shouldn't be an issue in terms of our financials, we don't think.
And the Medicaid, one note on that is because these are a couple years back, we did switch how we did our transportation. In the past, we didn't have the appropriate logs to be able to claim transportation on the Medicare claims. A couple years back, Yvonne worked and got that in place. So now they are increasing, but it was hard to predict how much that would impact.
right,
So
for
that
sure.
was one of the big reasons for
Okay.
the impact.
Okay. Mr. Como.
And go back, I'll age myself again here. There was a time where we didn't collect this. It was too much of a pain And I don't.
And it is.
Yeah,
It still is.
well, and so then we caught up. We and this is probably a dozen years ago or so, is probably how far back we're going. And it took us like 3 years to get 1 year, and now it's getting a little better. A year delay isn't too bad, and it was actually smaller than. This is huge. The $580,000 is huge. I think the very first one was maybe around. It might not have even hit 100,000 back in the day when we first started to look at this, and it has paid off. That's a significant dollar amount. So I'm glad that we're on it and still doing it, but it's still like jumping through hoops, is what I just heard you say.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of work to document the claims and to document the annual transportation information, but clearly it's worth that sum of money. And one note, most of the Medicaid expenditures are due to special education, but the state allows us to put it back into Fund 10 because it can really, because of the fluctuation and the timing, it can really affect your maintenance of effort in Fund 27, which is a big problem if that happens. So several years back, the state said, you know what, no, these annual reconciliations, your monthly claims that you get, still go into Fund 27, but the annual reconciliations can go back into Fund 10.
Any other questions? Ready? You're up.
Okay, well, let's talk then health. Our health claims are just starting to catch up with where we would expect them to be. Unfortunately, it's happening in the last month of the fiscal year. And so right now, as of June, with maybe a few trickle-in expenditures yet, we're sitting with a surplus of $5.8 million in our self-funded claims. And as we've talked in the past, we have limited options what can be done with this. We can do premium holidays. We can move it into our reserved for future claims account. And what, as Darren, I think, talked at the last meeting, what we're choosing to do is first we're holding flat the insurance rates for the employees, so there's not a jump in insurance rates. That will take up some of it potentially. And then we'll be looking at probably the next board meeting, we'll have the information to approve moving that balance into the restricted fund balance for claims. The reason we have to wait is we have to get our final IBNR, and that we can't calculate until about middle of July. So once we know our final IBNR, our IBNR is usually around 1.8 million, so I would anticipate about 4 million. But when we looked at it as a snapshot of where it would have been in May, it was only $1 million. But now that the claims are catching up, I would expect it to be higher than that. So we'll come back with more information next month on looking for approval to move that amount into our reserve.
Any questions on that, Mr. Como?
I do think it's important to share essentially with our employees by keeping premiums down when we can. We always haven't been able to do that. That's actually been a rarity, or keeping it down potentially by changing the plan itself. So I do think that we do need to reward our employees from time to time when we can. I mean, we can't always. And this has been a very difficult part of our budget over the years. We took a risk when we went to being self-insured, and that risk has paid off. And I don't see anything wrong with sharing that with the employees. I think it's a good thing.
Agreed. Any other comments regarding the insurance?
The dental insurance, we're ending right about where we started the year, and so that doesn't have quite as, the rules are a little different on that, so we can leave that into our dental insurance fund balance.
That's a defined benefit, isn't it? Yeah.
Then the only other thing is the taxes, where the taxes all show up as in your revenue report is received, but we book them as receivables because we still have a final August payment. But we're right on track with amounts that we've received already this year. So don't expect any surprises in August. And it doesn't show up in August on the new reports because it's already reflected as a revenue for this year.
Any other questions? Comments? Alrighty. Thank you, Sherry. Moving on, our next discussion information item is the 2021-2022 budget development.
Hey, well, it's that time of year where we play a lot of guessing games. And so what's a little different from where we were at last month is we did get our July 1st aid estimate from DPI. And DPI is anticipating that our general state aid is going to come in at $51,777,526. That's based on, they're looking at it based on our budget. And so I cranked in our actuals, is where we're at right now, into the aid formula, and I come up with a little bit different number when I do that. I think we'll have a little more aid than they're anticipating, of $52,199,790. So I have three scenarios. The scenario A is our July 1st aid estimate at the flat per pupil and the flat per member. The scenario B is the estimate that I have for our state aid based on our current actuals, and then again it's the flat per pupil aid, but the $150 per pupil increase to the membership amount. And then scenario C is the estimate on that I've put together on the actuals, but with a flat per pupil and a flat per member. And as we talked about last month, really because we're in this declining enrollment, it's really the hold harmless that just gets played with. When you look at scenario A and scenario C, our hold harmless is $2.5 million. But when we get the extra $150 per pupil, really all it's doing is dropping our hold harmless, so our additional revenue isn't that much. The increase to the revenue limit is $38,000, I believe. Yes, $38,000. So it seems like it's a lot to get an extra $150 per student, but while we're in this mode of declining enrollment, it's a numbers game with this hold harmless. Now, the hold harmless will eventually go away, so that increase is a good thing in the long run. Going down to the levy, then, what we've done is tried to hold the levy at about the same as what it was last year, the tax rate at 8.02. And so really where the difference is, you see there's just a slight difference in the Fund 10 revenue limit levy, depending on which scenario we're in, but it's really close, within $400,000 on any of them. The big difference becomes into the Fund 39 levy and how much we can defease in this particular year and keep it at 802. So that defeasance amount is there for us to continue to look at until we get to the final budget, and the board can make decisions on how, if you choose to use that in defease or choose to bring the rate down. But that's, as we learn more, all these numbers will continue to change. We play that game all summer, and we get pieces here and pieces there. I have assumed a estimate of a 2% increase in the equalized value, the property values. Last year we were at 4.56. That dramatically impacts the levy rate, the tax rate, if that comes in higher than 2% or lower than 2%. But 2% is kind of always a conservative estimate that we use.
2% is our 10-year average. That's why we.
Oh, okay.
Questions?
Como.
I'll do a little history thing again. I remember the first time it went below zero. That was a shocker. That was during the financial meltdown. And 2007, 2008, 2009, those years was the first time that we had negative numbers that we dealt with. It feels way better to be in the positive side of things. I think 2% is, and you said that's the average of 10 years, Darren? So, yeah, I think that's a good number to pick. And last year, we had that significantly higher than what we had, in our estimates, and that had helped us out quite a bit. So, we'll see where it goes. There's a lot of things that still need to get pulled together, but from a first snapshot scenario, and I know a lot of things will change, I think this is good news for our constituents.
Mr. Dietz.
Sherry, could you tell me how e-Achieve enrollment affects our overall enrollment picture over years or over time? Like our e-Achieve enrollment for this year?
eAchieve enrollment doesn't necessarily impact this because it doesn't impact our actual student count. Where it comes into the picture is that we get additional money above and beyond this from other school districts for open enrollment. And so on the amendment page, what you can see is, so what we're always looking for with the open enrollment is what's the bottom line between what we have going out in students and what we have coming in. And eAchieve always helps us with that coming in substantially. Without eAchieve, we would be reverse. We would be spending more money at other districts. So it doesn't really change this picture, but it changes revenue in other places.
The revenue limit, which is what this is really looking at, is strictly resident pupils.
Right.
Even the ones who leave us, we get to count.
Yeah.
But we don't get the count the ones that come in then, because we're getting the revenue in another way.
So when we talk about continued declining or steady declining enrollment, we're talking about resident population, and eAchieve is certainly helping us on the open enrollment side. But
Thank you.
the one other thing on that sheet that the tax scenarios that Sherry had that I thought we should point out is if you look at the current year, the 2021 final levy, and the full revenue limit authority is $130 million. And even with what the governor had proposed with the $150 extra per pupil, or what the legislature approved, we are less than we were last year in revenue limit authority. Now, part of that's the energy exemption. That finally went away. So it's kind of it's flat,
Right.
a slight decline. But that's where our structural deficit problems come from is strictly lack of revenue growth. Our expenditures, and everyone has a different opinion, I suppose, on what our expenditures should go up, but it's not like our expenditures are going up 10% and revenue is only going up 7%. It's relatively flat revenue and slight increase in expenditures. Now, ESSER is going to change all that and make our numbers look crazy, and we're not going to be able to compare it to history very well. And then in terms of what we will likely bring back to you for a tax levy, as we were sitting here talking, I usually come in with a little more conservative number, maybe than what even you see here, so we can come back in fall, be sure that it's a much better picture. So we might try that as well. But overall, I think it's when you don't have revenue growth, revenue limit authority growth, it's really pretty easy to come in with flat or near flat levies because there's no growth. So I always say, tell me what conversation I'm having, and I'll tell you, what's the good and bad on a topic, who's in the audience. So, but I do think at a minimum, I think 802 is very doable this year in what I'm seeing. I even think our aid, this doesn't factor in the state biennial budget either, which has an
Right.
increase in aid according to what was approved by the legislature. So I think we'll have a very good picture come fall. We will have to spend some time on the defeasance in fall, though, and kind of target where do we want to end up in terms of an overall levy. But one of the easier conversations we'll probably have this fall. So.
Hey, Mr. Dietz, one thing to point out, it isn't open enrollment, but when you look at under the revenue limit calculation, the exemptions, there's the last line item is new choice pupil adjustment.
Okay.
What that is the students that are going to private schools.
Vouchers.
And the voucher program. And that does impact as far as it it increases every year, and it's been a significant jump. Now, we get the exemption only because on the flip side, we get we have to put out an equal expenditure to that amount. So all that's saying is, yep, you're going to have to spend this $3 million. We won't know the actual number till fall. So we're going to have to spend it, and then they give us that additional revenue limit. So while that number looks like, oh, it's getting bigger, there's going to be an equal expense to wash that out.
We're essentially doing their accounting for them. That's what it is in the end. We're just a cash clearinghouse on the voucher
Guys?
program.
Because we're making the payments, right?
Yeah, the
Yes.
revenue always
Yes,
meets the
right.
expenditures.
We're
so-
being the bank.
It's exactly in and out on the revenue and expenditure
Right.
side, but it can be misleading when you just look at it and say, oh, they're giving us an exemption of $3 million. It isn't an additional $3 million, it's paying for the voucher
Right,
program.
it's going to be shipped out. We're
Yep.
just a pass-through
So
funds.
because that kind of relates to open enrollment, I
Right.
thought it was
Right.
important to
Thank you
point that
very
out.
much.
So that's where we are with the budget development, and the governor has until, I don't know if it's midnight on Friday or whatever, until Friday to veto, sign, or use his line item vetoes. So we probably won't get any clear information until middle of next week, unless the legislature tries to overturn and all that. But
Right.
so we'll be in a better position to talk about all this next month, because we will be providing you a preliminary budget and tax levy for your approval. That'll go to the budget hearing, just so we can have the budget hearing, and then again,
In
the
August.
final approval all
Right.
comes in October.
Other questions or comments about the budget development? Alrighty. Our final discussion information item is the Referendum Projects budget update.
Yeah, I enclosed our balance sheet that we've been using since the beginning. It kind of shows where we are in terms of total expenditures. I don't know if you want me to go through that because of time. I also have a slide deck that I'm more than willing to go through, but if we want to get moving to HR, I'm also willing to remind the board in an email tomorrow, hey, just go out and take a look at it. It shows some of the drawings or renderings of what the projects were supposed to look like versus actual construction pictures. But then the end of it is, and it ties out to the balance sheet, is that we are on budget. We're at even right now, and that's we're assuming we spend every dollar of contingency, which we still have over $250,000 of a contingency, and we're out of the ground in all the locations.
Right.
So that's a big hurdle to pass. So I think we're doing really good. We'll be substantially complete on August 31st with all the referendum work. There certainly will be some loose ends, but I think we're in a very good place.
Okay. Is there any questions? I don't think we need to see the slideshow. But is there any questions about the balance sheet detail? Where we're supposed to be, though, Darren, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and one other thing, referendum provided $60 million plus $1 million of interest roughly, but we're actually, with district dollars, doing almost $67 million worth of work.
Right.
So some operational dollars have gone into this as well, and I think that's important to point out.
Alrighty, any questions? Okay, so
All good news.
all good news is right. The last thing would be recommendations for future committee meetings, if anybody has any. If not, if you do have any, you can send them to Daryl. Mr. Como?
Last year, we had taken some time to look at ventilation, and we had a request by a constituent. And I think that, I don't know if it's next month or the following month. I don't know what your agenda is looking like, but I think we should revisit that, especially as we continue to still understand ESSER dollars. I don't know if we can just do one-time spending on that. There may be some continuing expenses that we would incur too with maybe some of the strategies, but at least take a look at it and see if there's really any changes to our thought process of where we were at last year, because we know a lot more now.
Yeah, we've gotten the report, or we'll be getting the final report from Ring and Do. Remember, we hired an engineering firm to come in and evaluate all of our buildings. We didn't have them evaluate the middle schools because we're in the process of upgrading all that equipment, and they're getting evaluated through that. But we do plan probably September coming back to you, and some of the things in the Ring and Do report we are doing this summer improving filtration where we can, cleaning out the vents and the whole system, kind of the things we could just do in our normal operation. But in September, I think we'll be coming back with an overall report out on it. So Karen's comments were very timely, but also talk about, and I think that's our jump start into talking about where do we go with the ESSER funds.
Right.
And you're
for
all
sure.
well aware it's one-time money, and that's an opportunity, and it's also a burden at the end of that. So,
Right.
So it will be coming up in the next couple of months. But even I was asked, well, why haven't you done more on that? The engineering and stuff that needs to go into changing out HVAC systems there was no way a timeline was going to happen for this summer. So we hope to get some sort of board approval at the latest when you approve the final budget. Maybe it's baked into the budget overall, and then we can spend the rest of winter with the engineering and bidding out and hit the ground if the board desires next summer. So,
No, and just to that point, I think that when we budget this out, an important budget point is any makeup air that you're bringing into the buildings has to be conditioned. So that has to be budgeted for both heat and air conditioning, and what that's going to actually impact our energy budget.
yeah.
Because it will be drastic. It could be drastic increase our energy bills conditioning that air. So that also has to be, because that is often forgotten.
That's a very good point.
Bringing makeup air in, everybody forgets you got to heat it and you got to cool
Yes.
it. And you got to dehumidify it too.
It's a very good point you're making, because as I read the preliminary draft of the report, I remember the energy savings days. We spent a lot of money in this district and other districts I worked at, and we are undoing all the
closed
concepts
everything
we
up.
chose to
Yes.
pursue then are being
I might
thrown
add,
out the window.
The federal government is also doing that too, because they paid homeowners to close up their houses.
Yeah.
And now they want that ventilation back, and you got to heat that air. You got to condition the air. So that's an important part of the budget. Alrighty. Any other questions? Fantastic. Meeting adjourned.